Good morning. Shamla Kishori was scheduled to give class today, and if you think I'm Shamla Kishori, you should have your eyes examined. She has laryngitis, so the only way she can give class would be like this today. So, I mean, not terribly sick, but she can't speak. So she asked me to substitute. So for better, I actually like her classes better than mine, but you got me, so what can you do? Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Oh, good. I was hungry. Okay. Today we'll have a little science video, which is very relevant for the verses we're doing. And we'll have a science class, and at the end, we'll have a quiz. Okay, we won't. Okay, but I think you'll find this quite interesting because it's bringing up an issue that you've probably thought about. During the class, there'll be times when some of you ask questions or comments, and I'm asking you to do me a favor, because I don't really know everybody here. I only physically come when I'm giving classes. I may be listening online. So whenever you have a question or comment, first thing I want you to say is your name, so I can make sure I know everybody, because the problem is all you look alike to me. So if you don't mind saying your name, or if you're embarrassed about the question you're going to ask, then just say somebody else's name. That's also acceptable. Okay. So we're beginning with this third canto, 29th chapter, is a really wonderful and important chapter, because here Kapila Dev is explaining to Devahuti what is the nature of devotional service. We all talk about, let's just engage in devotional service, and if you do devotional service, all your problems are solved, and even if you commit the most abominable activities, if you're engaged in devotional service, you need to be considered saintly because you're rightly situated. Bewildering verses like that, so much related to devotional service. But what actually is devotional service? This chapter actually gets into it. Now, we're not doing a whole chapter. We're only doing a section. But the section we're doing makes some critical points. So we begin with verse 36. Okay. Let's go to, and I'm just read the translation, and we'll focus on 37 and then do some other verses. The Purusha, who the individual soul must approach, is the eternal form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is known as Brahman and Paramatma. He is a transcendental chief personality, and his activities are all spiritual. I'm going to read just part of the purport. Well, there are 3 steps in spiritual realization. And they're all progressive steps. We just don't want to get stuck. The first step, based on this verse, can somebody tell me what the first step is? Yes.
Brahman.
You didn't follow my instructions.
Sorry.
Good.
Brahman.
No,
Brahman is the first.
First you say your name.
Bhanu.
Very good. And then you get the microphone and then answer. Perfect. You got it. Go for it. Say again.
Brahman realization
It's the first step. Brahman. Anybody here Brahman realized? Come on. Anybody here had an experience that you're kind of connected to everything? Yeah. The one behind the many. Almost every one of us has had some realization that may be very profound, maybe just in passing, but we have a feeling. And that's the first step. And if you stop there, you're really stuck. Because that is the unity behind the diversity. That's the goal of the philosophers, the unity behind the diversity. Diversity is easy. We're looking here, we have people with Hispanic bodies, Indian bodies, European bodies, we have male, female, and whatever else. So we have all kinds of varieties, there's no shortage. We have tables, microphones, plenty of variety. What's the unity? Especially among the conscious entities. So that's Brahman realization. What's next after that? What comes after Brahman? Yes. Microphone and name are the order.
So I can say a different name than mine, right?
Of course. Especially if you're going to say something that you'll be embarrassed by. I would definitely use a different name.
A name, yeah, that's my name. Okay, so
Okay.
I use the word Ujendra, and my answer to question is Paramatma realization.
Paramatma. What is Paramatma realization?
It's the Lord within the heart, God, Vishnu within the heart, within other living entities, and within the molecule.
And that's what the yogis are doing when they're really meditating, not just doing their stretches, but really meditating deeply. They're trying to understand the Lord in the heart. Now, every one of you has understood the Lord in the heart. Somebody get an example of understanding the Lord in the heart. And there's no one in this room who hasn't had the experience. Can somebody give me an example? Yeah.
My name is Narada Mundas. And yeah, I just remember the first time I saw an image of Vishnu and like the way he stands like in his Paramatma form. And yeah, then when I walked, I was just meditating on him everywhere, like all the things. And I don't know how like deep it was, but the some level is there.
Well, I'll give you an example. When I go to Vrindavan, who's here has been to Vrindavan? Okay, the unseen hand of Krishna becomes a little more visible. You can actually experience that kind of. There was a movie when I was growing up, I saw based on an H.G. Wells novel called The Invisible Man. Who has seen that? It was about this H.G. Wells, he's a very famous novelist from 120 years ago, wrote a book called The Invisible Man, and this man found a way to be invisible. And then, of course, that did not turn out well, and he became very mischievous. You can steal, do many things. So then they had to figure out how to find him. So I'm trying to remember, I think they threw powder or something, because they throw powder, it would kind of give a little bit of his form, and you could see him in this, science fiction thing from 100 years ago. And When I was in Vrindavan, the invisible hand of Krishna was a little more visible than usual. I've had that experience. I'm sure some of you have had it. And then how does that relate to Paramatma? Well, we start hearing the Lord in our heart is actually talking to us. We're just not listening. And we can actually, and all of you, you've chanted Hare Krishna enough. I've had the experience. Yeah, Krishna's telling me something. I'm just not a good listener. And the yogis actually see a form of the Lord in the heart. That's another step. Then after that, what's the step after that called? Yes. You can pick a different name if you like. Okay.
And Bhagavatam realization.
Bhagavan, that means that not only is the Lord in my heart, but the Lord is also a person. I say himself, but the Lord comes in pairs, him and herselves. Radha and Krishna, Sita Ram, Lakshmi Narayan. So the Lord is actually a person. So these are the steps of realizations talked about here. Now we'll go to verse 37. We'll go to the Sanskrit. Okay. I'm going to have one of you read it while I...
Rupa Paris Param Divyam Kala Itya Vidya Hityate Uttanam Mahadadinam Yato Vina Dusham Vayam
Rupa Vedas Param Divyam Kala Itya Vidyate Uttana Mahadadarinam Yato Vina Dishtambayam.
Okay, somebody want to read the translation?
The time factor who causes the transformation of the various material manifestations is another feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anyone who does not know that time is the same Supreme Personality is afraid of the time factor.
Okay, and who would like to read the purport? Please, name first.
Mother Yaśodā.
Thank you.
Everyone is afraid of the activities of time, but a devotee who knows that the time factor is another representation or manifestation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead has nothing to fear from the influence of time. The phrase Rupa Veda Spadam is very significant. By the influence of time, so many forms are changing. For example, when a child is born, his form is small, but in the course of time, that form changes into a larger form. The body of a boy, then the body of a young man. Similarly, everything is changed and transformed by the time factor, or by the indirect control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Usually, we do not see any difference between the body of a child, the body of a boy, or the body of a young man, because we know that these changes are due to the action of the time factor. There is cause for fear for a person who does not know how time acts.
Okay, let's read the, you're a good reader. Read the next verse for me, please, in English.
Okay, thank you. Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the enjoyer of all sacrifices, is the time factor and the master of all masters. He enters everyone's heart, he is the support of everyone, and he causes every being to be annihilated by another.
And next verse.
Should I continue?
Yes, please. You're on a roll.
No one is dear to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, nor is anyone his enemy or friend, but he gives inspiration to those who have not forgotten him and destroys those who have.
And the next 3 verses. I'll do that while we're waiting. Out of fear of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the wind blows. Out of fear of him, the sun shines. Out of fear of him, the rain pours forth showers. Out of fear of him, the host of heavenly bodies shed their luster. Out of fear of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the trees, creepers, herbs, and seasonal plants and flowers blossom and fructify each in its own season. Up to verse 42. Continue, please.
Out of fear of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the rivers flow, and the ocean never overflows. Out of fear of him, only does fire burn, and does the earth, with its mountains not sink in the water of the universe. Subject to the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the sky allows outer space to accommodate all the various planets, which hold innumerable living entities. The total universal body expands with its 7 coverings under his supreme control. Out of fear of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the directing demigods in charge of the modes of material nature carry out the function of creation, maintenance, and destruction. Everything animate and inanimate within this material world is under their control.
And last verse.
The eternal time factor has no beginning and no end. It is the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the maker of the criminal world. It brings about the end of the phenomenal world. It carries on the work of creation by bringing one individual into existence from another. And likewise, it dissolves the universe by destroying even the Lord of Death, Yamaraj.
Is my YouTube queued up?
Yeah.
Okay, in a few minutes I'll have that. So I am going to ask a question. We can take a poll. Here we're talking about the wind blowing, everything happening by God. But I thought material nature does everything. So if material nature is doing everything, how, well, I'm not going to make a poll on this, but how is it that God still can control everything? I mean, is God controlling that this book is dropping on the table? Can God control things? Can miracles really happen? Can God change the laws of material nature? Are the laws of physics and having a God who does all of these things, is that even compatible? Has anyone thought of that question? Has anyone in the room thought, how can God be behind everything, but the laws of nature actually be working? Because the laws of nature work. You know, Newton sat allegedly under a tree and an apple fell and he got the law of gravity. The law of gravity always works. I've never seen anybody float away yet. So do we really need God in this picture? Has anybody here wondered about this question? How can the laws of physics work and have God still controlling everything? Anybody? Or that hasn't crossed people's mind? Crossed my mind. I mean, definitely in our CERN. The genius among the devotees who passed on a decade and a half ago was Sariputta, Richard Thompson, with the Bhaktivedanta Institute. He was our genius. And he gave a paper on this subject called God and the Laws of Physics. And I'm going to give you a little introduction to what he taught. I was at the College of Worcester in Ohio, and I invited him to come. I went to the Department of Religion, and they gave him an honorarium and a ticket to come and speak. And it was an unusual college in that they had an endowment and they recruited undergraduate students from India. No other place in America did it at that time. So they had this kind of real interest in Eastern and Western philosophy, originally a Methodist institution that had given up its affiliation. So the religion department had this distinguished chair. And the chair, before any symposium, would make this announcement. Remember, faculty, after our speaker is done, only students can ask questions. When the students are done, then the faculty can have a chance to speak. Sariputta gave the talk, which I'm going to go into. When that talk was over, the chair of the religion department, like, I'm not kidding, the chairs of most religion departments was an atheist, shot his hand up in the air and peppered Sariputta with one question after another, because his atheism was challenged by this brilliant talk. What I'm going to explain does not prove the existence of God. It just gives a way it all fits in. And we're going to begin this with a 4-minute video. Go for it.
The street. Meanwhile, a banker gets into his new car without knowing that it has a problem with the brakes. Our man crosses the street and doesn't see the car. The man is run over and dies. This man is no less than Albert Einstein. That year, Einstein should have published 4 works that would become the basis of modern physics. Innovations like GPS, TV screens, the semiconductors that allowed us to create laptops never happened. The computer, the laptop, the mobile you are watching this video on never come into existence. And this video doesn't exist either. This sequence of events is an example of what is known as the butterfly effect, a manifestation of chaos theory. For many centuries, the world was explained through the laws of Isaac Newton in classical physics. According to these laws, if the current state of an object is known, its future behavior can be predicted with relative ease. Chaos theory questions this deterministic vision. Not everything is predictable anymore, nor does it work like clockwork. Since the 1800s, mathematicians have raised the idea that not all phenomena could be predicted by Newtonian laws. But a meteorologist named Edward Lorenz made chaos theory a visible phenomenon. It all started in 1961, when he was working on a mathematical model to forecast the weather. Lorenz entered data such as temperature, humidity, pressure, and wind direction into his computer. His computer would draw a graph modeling what the weather would be like, not always accurate, but very close to reality. One morning, Lorenz decided to verify some results. He stopped the computer to save time, entered the numbers himself, and went to grab a coffee. When he returned, the chart was incredibly different from the original. At the beginning, it started out pretty similar, but in the middle, it presented a completely different trajectory. Surprised, he checked the numbers. He found that the number he had entered was 3/10 less than the number used by the computer. That difference, which altered the trajectory so much, is equivalent to a particle of dust on the Eiffel Tower, or one less feather in the weight of a duck. Lorenz deduced that this experiment was not a special case, that there were other systems in which tiny differences produced, over time, monumental changes, making everything seem unpredictable. That the flapping of a butterfly in Brazil could, in theory, cause enough of a disturbance to spark a tornado in Texas. Even though we have a good idea of how the universe works, there are no measurements that allow us to determine the exact position and speed of every atom in the universe. And this inaccuracy in our calculations makes predictions difficult. One of the reasons why long-term prediction is impossible. But chaos is not the same as disorder. Although chaos makes predictions difficult, the universe is not random, and effects still follow causes. And no matter how chaotic it may seem, a system always follows a trajectory towards a certain point. For example, in the calculations Lawrence used for his model, the trajectory created a pattern that resembled the wings of a butterfly. Understanding these patterns of chaos has practical applications. In the stock market, it reminds us that a slight fluctuation can cause a crisis in the market. And that is why we cannot speak of predictions, but of problems.
So here's the story. A meteorologist is trying to predict where would a hurricane hit. Hurricane begins somewhere. Typical hurricanes hit Florida, begin in Africa as a dust devil. Then they go out in the Atlantic, they pick up enough heat, they cross the ocean, and then the question is it going to hit New Orleans, which deserves it, or Florida, which certainly doesn't deserve it? And if you've been to New Orleans, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, it's another matter. So the question is, which way will it go? And what this Dr. Lawrence did is he put in the parameters, wind speed, humidity, temperature, all into a computer program. And in those days, we used timeshare computers, which we only have so much time on the computer, and then somebody else's turn. Computers couldn't multitask in those days. And he realized that he was putting in wind speed like to 5, 10 decimal places, but you can't measure wind. There's no instruments to measure wind speed like that. So let me cut off some of these decimal places so I use less computer time so I can do more calculations, so I can do more runs. So he cut off the decimals. And when he did, the prediction of the hurricane changed from hitting New Orleans to Miami. But nobody can ever, with the best instruments in the world, measure that fine. It was so fine that the flap of a butterfly going past this dust devil was enough to make the hurricane hit Miami and not New Orleans. And we can never measure it. This is where God and the laws of physics come. So what Sariputa's hypothesis was, not a proof of God, saying God can control everything and still the laws of physics could work, this hypothesis. How is that possible? Well, these tiny little changes, like that clock was 1 minute late at the beginning of the BBC, and then a sequence of events occurred at a level way lower than we can measure. God can still control everything. It's still possible. Again, this is not a proof. It just explains the laws of physics can fully function in its deterministic manner, and God can still control everything. And we know, how does Krishna control it? Just by glancing. Just by glancing. So the laws of physics, and to have a God behind everything, the point is not a proof. It's not incompatible. And that's the point of what I'm trying to say here. It's not incompatible. When Sariputta presented that at the College of Worcester, the atheistic chairman of the department went nuts, kept raising his hand and shooting questions because he wanted a deterministic universe in which everything is controlled by the laws of physics. Just doesn't work. There's a lecture I listen to regularly. There's a fellow named Don Lincoln at the Fermi Institute. Fermi is one of the top American think tanks on quantum physics. Because of the work I do at the Bhaktivedanta Institute, I have to keep up with what's going on in quantum physics. And he's a very excellent speaker. He'll discuss issues of cosmology and particle accelerators and antimatter, and he'll discuss these issues in a very understandable way. And he always ends his lecture with the most stupidest of comments. I have to cringe every time I listen to him. I listen to him because there's something I need to know. But at the end, he says, and as you know, physics is everything. Well, that takes us back to this Bhagavatam verse here. And the verse we're looking at and the topic that I was given to speak was, let me see, the official topic, which we have here. Devotees are not afraid of time or death. Everyone fears the Lord. So devotees aren't afraid of death. I'm wondering if Professor Lincoln is afraid of death. It's rare to meet someone. People always say, well, I'm not afraid to die. Put a gun to their head and see if that's really true. Has anybody here ever had a gun to their head? Me too. It's a little unnerving, isn't it? Having a gun to your head. Was it a big gun?
Pistol.
Oh, I had a rifle. They didn't shoot. Obviously, they didn't shoot you either. We're still here. It was in Bihar. Of course it was. It's a district magistrate's chowkidar.
Were you scared?
Actually, no, because I was stupid. At 22, it's stupid. I should have been. I did a calculation. The district magistrate, who's the big officer, was cheating me out of my $10 a month I was getting from a housing allowance. And for me, that was a lot of money then. And so I went in his office. I kept asking for it. He says it didn't come, but I knew he was lying. So I went and put my nose up to his, knocked everything off his desk. I said, you better give me the money. And then his guard comes in, puts the rifle at me, cocks the trigger. I put my hands up. I walk out. And a few minutes later, an hour later, a guard comes to my house and delivers me a pouch of money that he owed me, $30, 3 months. But the reason I wasn't overly scared was, one, I was stupid. 22, it tends to happen a lot. And second, I figured this district magistrate hated his job. It was the worst place. Singhbum district, that got to be the worst. I mean, it's the Bihar, with no insult to all insult intended for Biharis. But anyway, it's kind of like the Bronx of India. And the place I was in was like the pits of the Bronx of India. It was the bottom. And I knew the guy wanted it. And if he had an international incident with a foreigner, he'd never get his promotion. That was my calculation. I could have been wrong. And then if so, somebody else would be giving this class today. But generally, and a few other times there are death moments. One reason I think I was on a hijacked plane and I had to fight a hijacker and different things, and I should have been terrified. And one reason I wasn't terrified, I mean, we're all scared of death, but one reason I wasn't is I actually thought of Krishna. I actually, at the time, I had decades of training. I thought, okay, Krishna has a plan. And that took away the fear. So when we actually understand Krishna has a plan, can't die, it does generally take away the fear. But under every other circumstance, people are scared of death. And people who tell me, oh, I'm not scared of dying, when the gun's at their head, they usually feel quite different about it. So, and here we're talking about even the trees, they grow because of fear. What does that mean? The trees are growing, the wind is moving because fear. What it means is that behind the scenes, at this very micro level, God can still control everything. At the same time, the laws of nature actually work and they function, and we're not defying the laws of nature. Now, you'll meet yogis who can do mystical things and they can apparently defy certain laws of nature. They're not really defying laws of nature. What they're doing is they're dealing with laws that we don't yet understand. One time, Prabhupada was asked, Prabhupada, do you have any mystic powers? Are you curious about the answer to that? Prabhupada said, I have the greatest mystic power, a mystic power that hardly any yogi has. And those of you who read Radha Swami, Amazing Journey Home, he visited yogis who can do things that ordinary people can't do. These things are real. But Prabhupada said, I have the greatest mystic power. A mystic power is so rare that hardly any yogi has ever gotten this power. Would you like to know what that power is? Hardly any yogi has it. And so devotees were thinking, he can lift a mountain, he can become smaller than an atom, he can appear into 8 places at once. Which power does he have? Devotees, their eyes were just rolling, which is it? And then Prabhupada shocked him with the greatest of mystic powers. He said, I can be alone in a room with beautiful naked women and have no disturbance whatsoever. He said, that is the rarest of yoga powers. And so, yes, there are mystic yoga powers, but that is the greatest power, to be completely controlled. The reason why we don't get into the yogic mystic powers in big ways as devotees is it becomes a distraction. First, in Kali Yuga, it's very hard to cultivate these things. Second, we do, it immediately creates a lot of pride and creates other issues. So Prabhupada certainly discouraged us from pursuing those paths. But out of curiosity, we're all curious. Somebody can float, somebody can do this. But the greatest mystic power Prabhupada gave us. So that's the one we tried to cultivate. Now I'm going to pause here with 9 minutes left. Are there any questions on what I'm saying, Narada Muni?
Yeah, maybe I should use the audience for this one.
Yeah, yes, you might want to. That's a good idea.
You already said it, so I was when I was growing up in a Christian church. Actually, before I go there, you mentioned how the butterfly effect, how these infinitesimal small influences can change the course, and that kind of gives more credence to like the existence of not existence, but it doesn't. Like God can use physics, and he can change up things. It's kind of how I was hearing you say it. And then I also heard growing up in the Christian church, like the more progressive Christians would say, why can't God have made us through evolution? Why? But I think that's as a VI rep, I think that's something I wanted to maybe hear how you address when someone says a comment like that.
Okay. Well, yeah, sure. Even Prabhupada commented. One thing, it was very negative on evolution, that life comes from matter. You have a primordial soup, the old Miller experiment, and a bolt of lightning comes, and some amino acids coalesce into a protein, and it evolves into you and me, and consciousness is never there. We know certain things in evolution occur. For example, there are wolves and there are chihuahuas, and they're the same, but they don't look alike. But micro changes, changes like that, we know very well. But to go from there was one Christian guy, he was a creationist, and certainly we don't agree with his view that all the rocks were deposited in Noah's flood 5,000 years ago or something. But his name was Gish, and he used to have this saying. He said, can you imagine you go from a fish to a Gish? How could that happen? And there's a big movement of intelligent design. The more we learn about the body and get into the cellular structures and even the quantum activities that occur on at room temperatures, which aren't supposed to happen. But they do, the more we see these things, the more complex we know, the more I see there's intelligence behind it. For example, I'm looking at a painting of Lord Nrsimhadev over here. Now, I can look at it and wonder, what kind of ink did they use? And what's that canvas made of? And what are the materials? But that doesn't, what I really want to know is who's the artist. It just didn't appear. If I take all the materials, canvas materials and frame materials and paint materials and I put it in a blender, I'm never going to get that painting. Not at all. So there is an intelligence. Now, what is the interaction of intelligence with I'm a geologist, so with the fossil record, it's still kind of mysterious. And even Prabhupada would comment that life comes from life is kind of a madness. There's no evidence for it, and there's not. At the same time, he said, there's obviously changes go on, changes in the nature of the world, which includes a certain amount of evolution. So it's a complex subject. There's not simple answers. The idea that, God could have done it that way, well, it gets extreme. I'll give one example. When the first dinosaur bones were found, I wonder, what are these creatures? And since the earth was only 5,000 years old, the creationists would say, we know what the dinosaur bones are. You know what their answer was? Anybody know? Curious answer. Their answer was, it was God planting the bones to fool us. It's kind of a dumb answer, but that was the answer. God planted these bones to fool us. So if we don't know a mechanism, and anytime we don't know a mechanism, then we fall back on God did it, then that's called the God of the gaps in philosophy. Whatever you don't know, you assign to God, and then if somebody fills in the gap, you move God back to another gap. That's not very philosophically sound. So I'm trying to avoid an argument of the God of the gaps. That's dangerous. That said, I don't have all the answers. How do we interpret the fossil record? I looked at it for 50 years. We still don't know answers to all these things. Judith Karma has written some very good books on it that get into it. What we do know is philosophically, when I see that painting, I know there's intelligence behind it. And we see intelligence and desire. For example, a caterpillar wants to become a butterfly. There's some desire, consciousness. So the missing link in evolution. What is a missing link? It's not some fossil we haven't found yet. The missing link in evolution is consciousness. When Darwin came out with his theory, paleontology, the study of fossils, was a relatively new science. And so it wasn't explored in great depth. And they said, okay, we're going to find all the missing links of these gradual changes. Well, 150 years later, they still didn't find them. There's hardly any missing links at all. And the missing links they found turned out, in almost every case, not to be a good example. So then in 1972, two very famous paleontologists, Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge, very prominent, wrote a paper called Punctuated Equilibrium. And in 77, they wrote a paper 5 years later and said, we've published our paper. And 5 years later, no one has challenged us, therefore we win. And that's the way it works in scientific circles. Now, 50 years later, it's still not challenged. What their theory said is like this. Evolution occurs so slow, we don't really see it in our lifetimes. We'll see, you can breed plants and breed dogs, little changes, but big evolution, it occurs too slow to see. But it also occurs too fast to leave a fossil record. It occurs in this liminal space where you just too fast to see their lifetimes and too slow to leave a record. And it only occurs, evolution occurs when there's some extreme environmental pressure, like there's some catastrophe, and I won't go into more detail of it. I could go into it, but with time short, I won't. And they came up with this theory because the fossil record does not match the evidence. So they had to come up with a new theory. And the new theory has its own holes. Now, you may turn to me and say, well, what's the answer? Well, I don't know. I wasn't there. But I can say, obviously, everything we see says there's intelligence behind it. Now, exactly how the intelligence moves through this system, that's topic to be explored. Hope that answers your question. Yes, one more question, please.
Hare Krishna. I wonder if maybe you could speak a little bit about fearfulness and fearlessness, because what I was gathering from these verses is that the only opportunity we have as spirit souls to become fearless is through a human body in connection with Krishna consciousness. And that otherwise everything we do will be driven by fear of the time factor. You gave the example of the tree. And all I could think about was that the tree is growing out of fear, it will be cut down, that it needs to grow and grow to put out its seeds. And so and humans are doing this also. Humans out of fear are procreating as many children as possible, and nowadays as little children as possible. People are now fearful of procreation because of the degradation of the world. So I wondered if maybe you could talk about how in this human birth we're given an opportunity for fearlessness because we can connect to Krishna.
Yeah. Well, there are, I'm looking up for the Sanskrit word that we use for fear. But they use depends on the mode of nature you're in. If you're in the mode of ignorance, you can be quite fearless because you're dumb. Somebody's extreme in a mode of ignorance, they're a drunk and they fall down and their head's bleeding and they find it pretty funny. I've seen it. May have happened to some of us, who knows? So that's fear in the mode of ignorance. There's no fear. In the mode of passion, we're very fearful about gaining and losing things. So much money do I have today? So much more will I have tomorrow, it says in the Gita. We're fearful of losing it. So that's fear in the mode of passion. Fear in the mode of goodness is a little different. And we're going for that. In that fear in the mode of goodness is, hey, am I really doing the right thing? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Am I doing my dharma? Am I doing my duty? That's a good fear to have. So we should all be a little fearful. Prabhupada used to say, one of the shortcomings of devotees is we're not scared of Maya. Advaita made that point last class. We're just not scared of Maya. So we ought to be a little fearful that the world's a rough place. Like, for example, when I'm bicycling, and I bike here this morning, when I bike, I am fearful. I assume every single car is aiming for me. And so I drive in a fearful state, and therefore I'm still here. Because I assume I have a big target on me, and it says, hit me. Because people are on their phones, they're eating their breakfast. I don't know how they have any hands left to be on the steering wheel, and they're driving, and the radio's on. They're totally distracted. They're driving something that has 300 horses, literally 300 horses under the hood. And so I have something to be fearful about, so I'm a little cautious. So that's intelligent fear. So we at the same time, if we remember Krishna, there's nothing to be fearful about. It doesn't mean we don't have the emotions. I love one Prabhupada story. Prabhupada, every week or so, when he was alone in New York, just struggling, he would go to the ticket master at the harbor and ask, when's the next boat to India? And the ticket master eventually said to him, every week you're coming asking, but you're never going. What's going on? Difficult positions. That's the normal human emotion. Fearful is named Abhicharan, means anytime we have these human emotions and we can't. So a little bit of fear can be a good thing. Somebody who has no fear whatsoever is either completely transcendental, I have no fears, or they're an idiot. And since most of us are not completely transcendental, let's not be idiots. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, other question or not, we'll stop here. Okay, yes, Sundar Leela.
My name is Surya.
Yes.
And I have a question. The verses say that out of fear of the Lord, the wind blows and the tree grows and the river flows. Why out of fear, not out of love?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. Why out of fear does a wind blow? Well, I'm not sure the wind understands love very much, but they have their duty to do. Let's say I am a police officer, and I have my duties to do. Generally, I'm not doing that out of I'm chasing a criminal. I'm not chasing a criminal or giving someone a ticket out of love for these people. I'm doing it out of fear. If I don't do it, I'm not doing my job. It's my job to do it. I have to do it. There's not much love involved in the mechanical processes of the world. Love is something that comes between consciousness, between conscious entities, I mean to say. So when the wind has its duty to do it, and it must do it, and if it doesn't do it, it's disobeying the laws of nature, which isn't allowed. So they're not conscious. So love requires a certain consciousness. That's my impression. There may be better answers than that. It's a good question. But that's the first thought that comes to my mind. Maybe somebody has yes, Advaita has an answer. Thank you for helping.
Well, the short answer is because it's on the wrong side of the fence. This world being the way it is, separate, created as a separate emanation from God.
Yeah.
And I would say any fear that comes is due to the poor relationship.
Between what? Between what?
Between two parties.
Okay.
So, and this place, this world being the place of forgetfulness of God.
Yeah.
That strikes a kind of, and it's indicative of a poor relationship. So therefore fear. Like a company.
Yeah.
In a company, everybody is afraid of being fired, right? If they don't perform well. So there's a fear if I don't perform well.
Yeah.
But the closer they are to the CEO, there's a betterment of relationship. So there's elements of affection and recognition and love.
And we see, I was just looking up the exact verse, but at the end of the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, ultimately, there's nothing to fear if you have a relationship with Krishna. If you don't, there's frankly everything to fear. I mean, I've had this week 2 of friends of mine passed on. One was the wonderful Ekanath, who has run the archives and had a massive heart attack and died instantly. A very wonderful devotee, ran the archives for decades. Wonderful devotee. Another was my local heroine, 93-year-old lady, Rosa Williams, who was she would sit at a restaurant in the 60s when Black people couldn't do that. And she was like one of the most powerful people in Gainesville, very, very effective. And I'm thinking, when we see people we know die, if we don't ourselves, and this is the lesson trying to give in here, think, what am I doing with my life? Can I become Abhi Charan? Can I become fearless? And the only way to become fearless, the instructions from Kapila Dev here, are by devotional service. There is no other way. Unless you're become fearless in the mode of ignorance. And that's pretty easy, but not very pleasant. With that, we'll stop here. Thank you very much. Hope you all have a fearless day. Hare Krishna. Okay.
Mahaprasad Govinde Namaha